This is English shorthand dictation number 199 and the dictation speed is 160 words per minute. Ready? Start. Sir, labor wants liberty. There is perhaps nothing new in this. What is new is labor's conception of liberty. Labor's conception of liberty is not merely the negative conception of absence of restraint, nor is labor's conception of liberty confined to the mere recognition of the right of the people to vote. Labor's conception of liberty is very positive. It involves the idea of government by the people. In the opinion of labor, government by the people does not mean parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary democracy is a form of government in which the function of the people has come to be to vote for their masters and leave them to rule. Such a scheme of government, in the opinion of labor, is a travesty of government by the people. Labor wants a government which is the government by the people in name as well as in fact. Secondly, liberty as conceived by labor includes the right to equal opportunity and the duty of the state to provide the fullest facilities for growth to every individual according to his needs. Labor wants equality. By equality, labor means abolition of privileges of every kind in law, in the civil service, in the army, in taxation, in trade, and in industry. In fact, it means the abolition of all processes which lead to inequality. Labor wants fraternity. By fraternity, it means an all-pervading sense of human brotherhood, unifying all classes and all nations, with peace on earth and goodwill towards man as its motto. The nationalists are serious opponents of labor. They accuse labor of taking an attitude which is said to be inconsistent with and injurious to Indian nationalism. Their second objection is that labor agrees to fight for the war without getting any assurances about India's independence. These are questions so often posed and so seriously argued that it is necessary to state what labor thinks of them. As to nationalism, labor's attitude is quite clear. Labor is not prepared to make a fetish of nationalism. If nationalism means the worship of the ancient past and discarding of everything that is not local in origin and color, then labor cannot accept nationalism as its creed. Labor cannot allow the living faith of the dead to become the dead faith of the living. Labor will not allow the ever expanding spirit of man to be strangled by the hand of the past, which has no meaning for the present and no hope for the future, nor will it allow it to be cramped in a narrow jacket of local particularism. Labor must constantly insist upon renovating the life of the people by being ever ready to borrow in order to repair, transform and recreate the body politic. If nationalism stands in the way of this rebuilding and reshaping of life, then labor must deny nationalism. Labor's creed is internationalism. Labor is interested in nationalism only because the wheels of democracy, such as representative parliaments, responsible executive, constitutional conventions, etc., work better in a community united by national sentiments. Nationalism to labor is only a means to an end. It is not an end in itself to which labor can agree to sacrifice what it regards as the most essential principles of life. As to independence, labor fully recognizes its importance, but labor thinks that there is a wrong approach to the question of independence and a misunderstanding about its importance. The independence of a nation does not tie it up to any particular form of government or organization of society. External independence is quite compatible with internal slavery. Independence means nothing more than that a nation has liberty to determine its form of government and its social order without dictation from outside. The worth of independence depends upon the kind of government and the kind of society that is built up. There is not much value in independence if the form of government and the order of society are to be those against which the world is fighting today. today. Labour thinks that more emphasis ought to have been placed on New India and less on Quit India. The appeal of a new India with a new order is bound to be greater than the appeal of independence. Indeed, the vision of a new order in a new India would greatly strengthen the determination to win freedom. Such an approach would certainly have stopped the many embarrassing questions which are being asked, namely freedom for what and freedom for whom. Secondly, Labour finds it difficult to understand the immediate realization of independence as a condition for support to the war effort. This condition marks a sudden development in the attitude of some people to the war effort and could be justified only if there was any sudden conspiracy to rob India of her right to freedom. But there is no evidence of any such conspiracy. Such conspiracy cannot succeed, no matter who the conspirators are. In the view of Labour, no one can deprive India of her right to freedom if she demands it with the combined strength of united people. If India's independence is in the balance, it is because of disunity among Indians. The enemies of India's independence are Indians and no others. Labour's attitude to this war is framed after a full realization of what is involved in the war. Labour is aware that it must win the war as well as peace if war is to be banished from the world. Labour is aware that it is not enough to defeat the Nazis and to destroy the possibilities of a new Nazi order. It is not a war for the old order. It is a war on both the old order and the Nazi order. Labour is aware that the only compensation for the cost of this war is the establishment of a new order in which liberty, equality and fraternity will not be mere slogans but will become facts of life. But the question of all questions is how can the hope of this new order materialize? On this question, Labour is quite emphatic. Labour insists that for the materialization of all these ideals, there is one condition that is primary, and that is success in the war. Without success in the war, there can be no self-government and self-determination for India. Without victory in the war, independence will be an idle talk. This is the reason why Labour is determined to win this war. This war is full of potentialities for good. It promises to give birth to a new order. Labour finds that this war is different from other wars. There are two features which distinguish it from other wars. In the first place, this war is not altogether a war for the division of the world's territory amongst the most powerful nations of the world, as the preceding wars have been. In this war, the division of the world's territory is not the only cause. This is a war in which there is a conflict of ideologies relating to the forms and systems of government under which humanity is to live. In the second place, this war is not altogether a mere war as other wars have been. Its object is not merely to defeat the enemy, to march on to his capital and to dictate a peace. This war, besides being a war, is also a revolution which demands a fundamental change in the terms of associated life and a replanning of the society. In this sense, it is a people's war, and if it is not, it could be and should be made into a people's war. Given these facts, Labour cannot be indifferent to this war and to its outcome. Labour is aware how the efforts in the past for the establishment of a new order have been frustrated time and again. That is because democracy, after it was brought into being, was left in the hands of the conservatives. If the people of the world take care to see that this mistake is not committed again in future, Labour believes that by fighting this war and establishing the new order, the world can be made safe for democracy. The country needs a lead, and the question is who can give this lead. I venture to say that Labour is capable of giving to the country the lead that it needs. Correct leadership, apart from other things, requires idealism and free thought. Idealism is possible for the aristocracy, though free thought is not. Idealism and free thought are both possible for Labour, but neither idealism nor free thought is possible for the middle class. The middle class does not possess the liberality of the aristocracy, which is necessary to welcome and nourish an ideal. It does not possess the hunger for the new order, which is the hope on which the labouring classes live. Labour, therefore, has a very distinct contribution to make in bringing about a return to the sane and safe ways of the past which Indians had been pursuing to reach their political destiny. Labour's lead to India and Indians is to to get into the fight and be united. The fruits of victory will be independence and a new social order. For such a victory, all must fight. Then the fruits of victory will be the patrimony of all, and there will be none to deny the rights of a united India to share in that patrimony.